Today we have a really extraordinary guest joining us, Paul Moore. And Paul is the founder of Wellings Capital, which is a real estate private equity firm. He's an expert and a true pioneer in real estate syndications and tax strategies. And his resume, gosh, his resume is one of the best of any that I've seen. He co founded a staffing firm. He's been a finalist twice in the Michigan Entrepreneur of the Year. He's completed over 100 residential and commercial investments, and he's authored two highly acclaimed books. And if that's not enough, Paul has been featured on Fox Business, Bigger Pockets, and over 200 different podcasts, and today 201. So, Paul, thank you very much for joining us, sir. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me on, Robert. It's a real honor to be here.
All right, well, let's kick off. So, Paul, you've had a really fascinating journey all the way from Ford Motor Company to becoming a real estate pioneer, right? So, talk a little about your transition from like the business world into real estate and what drew you specifically to real estate syndication.
Yeah, I had a job at Ford Motor Company in Detroit. I really loved it, but I always found myself tinkering with stuff in the evenings and weekends. So we eventually launched a staffing firm. After 5 years, we were fortunate enough to sell that to a small public company. And I thought, hey, I'm a full-time investor now. And you know what, Robert? I lied to myself. I didn't know I was lying, but I wasn't. I was a full-time speculator now. I think that's a little more accurate. And I think that is one of the biggest mistakes people make in real estate investing. Investing is when your principal is generally protected or protectable, and you've got a chance to make a profit. Speculating is when your principal is not at all protected and you've got a chance to make a profit. And I didn't know the difference. And so I made a lot of bad investments. I had a lot of money in my bank account and I blew a lot of it. I made a lot of mistakes. And I think that's a lot of what those learning experiences led me to doing a podcast for 4 years called How to Lose Money. And we interviewed 238 successful entrepreneurs and investors and learned about their many mistakes and pain, all that on the way to the top. But anyway, in 1999, I made my first investment. I got into flipping houses, then flipping waterfront lots. And you know what I found out? Um, because of my particular style, especially, I wasn't creating true wealth. I didn't even know what true wealth was. I assumed it was those people that had mansions and, Ferraris and all that. But, true wealth is having assets that produce cash flow. And I wasn't doing that. I was just flipping houses and then going on to the next house. And I didn't have assets that produce cash flow. And I think that's what led me from just flipping houses, flipping lots, etc. That's what led me over to the syndication realm eventually.
Okay. So, for our listeners that may be unfamiliar with syndication, can you talk a little about or break down what is a real estate syndication and why is syndication such a powerful investment tool versus directly investing in a piece of real estate, which is the way that we're always taught, right?
Yeah, so I'll probably answer this out of order. So we all know that the value of a residential home is based on comps.
Okay.
And if you take like somebody in my family did, bought $100,000 house, add 200,000 in upgrades to it, and you got 300 in it trying to flip it for a profit in a $200,000 neighborhood, you're probably not going to get your money out of that because the value is based on comps. Now, commercial real estate, the value is based on math. And that math formula is that the value of the property is the net operating income divided by the rate of return, also known as the cap rate or the capitalization rate. And the cap rate itself is sort of similar to comps, to be honest. But the point of this formula is you have a predefined formula you can use and you can drive appreciation or force appreciation by doing certain upgrades. So, for example, if I have a 100-unit apartment building and I've proven through upgrading 10 units that I can get an extra $150 a unit in rent by adding these countertops, cabinets, bathrooms, etc., then I can do math and figure out the value the return on investment versus the cap rate. And if it's much higher than the cap rate, if I can get a 25% annual return, for example, versus a capitalization rate of, say, 6%, it could be a very smart thing to do that. And I can use math to do that. The problem for most of us, Robert, is we don't have the capacity to go out and buy 100 unit or a
Mhm.
500 unit apartment building. We don't have the money to do that. We don't have the debt capacity. We don't have the
Yep.
time, we don't have the knowledge. We don't have how do we manage a property management team? And would we really be successful, or would we be another mom and pop that's sold at a discount at a fire sale? And the problem for most of us is we have this thing that Warren Buffett calls the circle of competence. Now, Buffett says it doesn't matter how big or small the circle is, it's just knowing where the edges are. And for most of us, our circle of competence doesn't include going out and buying a large apartment building. Enter syndications. Syndications allow all of us as investors to tap into another person's expertise. When I invest in Apple stocks or Tesla, I'm tapping into, Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or other people's expertise and the companies they built in the past and then hopefully in the future. And I'm tapping into their expertise and getting a return. It's the same with syndication. I'm tapping into an expert's expertise. And by doing that, it's allowing me to do something super important, and that is stay in my lane. You might have read the book, The One Thing by Gary Keller. Everybody knows
Mhm.
Keller Williams.
Sure.
The One Thing says, among many other smart things, it says, those who chase two rabbits catch neither. And it's likely if you've got a full-time job, a career, or even if you're flipping houses, if you try to go do something completely separate on the side, you might fail at both. It's a recipe for burnout, it's a recipe for failure. And you've got to decide, like I did, do I want A, the thrill of the chase, or B, would I rather build true wealth passively? And I've decided, especially at 61 years old, that I would rather passively build wealth on someone else's expertise. Syndications allow me to do that.
Love it. I think this is probably a good spot for me to chime in on my experience with the syndications because everything you're saying resonated with me. I found myself in around 2010, 2011 with a burgeoning career in the mortgage industry. It was very different from it was today, the real estate market back then. But I saw opportunity specifically in commercial real estate. And like you said, I didn't have time. I was like literally working 24 hours a day, breathing, sleeping, eating mortgage and real estate, specifically residential, right? And like helping my clients. So after some savings was built up, I was like, where do I invest my money? And I kept thinking of real estate. And at that time, there were some great deals on real estate. There was places I remember seeing condos down in Orlando for $20,000 and $30,000. But even that was above what I had. So I said, how can I get involved? And I was reading an article in Forbes at that time, which talked about the online syndications, which is now called real estate crowdfunding. And it mentioned a few of the portals and sites that were pioneering really that industry. And I was like, this is great. This is what I've been looking for. I can now take $20,000 or $30,000, and at that time we could get in deals with $5,000 at a time. I was able to invest in a mobile home park with only $5,000. That was like a $13 million total investment. That got my feet wet in syndication. That gave me a taste. I got in several deals just that first year, and they did really, really well. And I was like, this is the best way to invest in real estate. And at that time, I had already owned one property under my belt, a rental property. So I already had direct investment that was being managed for me, in another part of the country. But again, sitting on capital, where do you deploy it? How do you do it? You either need to do it yourself, which becomes like a part-time job or sometimes a full-time job, or just farm it out. Find people that already know what they're doing, piggyback on success. That's what syndication allows you to do. And now to fast forward to today, I would say personally about 30% of my net worth is in real estate syndications. Okay. That's how much I believe in it. And what it's given me is passive income. It's given me security. I have money literally depositing into my bank every month, even if I don't lift a finger, because I invested in these syndications. It doesn't pay all my bills, but it definitely helps. And it creates a really nice foundation, which then can be used for retirement, right? For
Yeah.
taking a sabbatical, for not needing to work, or for being able to pull back and not feel like you're tied to your job every day, right? To make money. So, with that said, I want to switch gears over to talking about tax strategies for a second, and specifically the tax advantages of real estate and how that really plays in with syndications, because a lot of people invest in real estate because they understand that there's tax advantages, right? The way
Right.
we get taxed on rental income and the way we can write off things like depreciation and mortgage interest, it's like there's opportunity there that is not available with other asset classes. So,
Yeah.
how does the tax strategy really tie in with syndication? Can you still get the same benefits of real estate tax advantage by investing through syndication?
Great question. Well, my last two books have a meaty chapter on tax strategies and tax advantages. I had a quick story. I have a friend who was a mentor, and he actually was paying about 120,000 a year in taxes. And he sat down with his CPA one day after reading two different articles, and he had lunch with him. And that was their last lunch. In fact, it was last meeting ever, because he said, "Hey, look at this. I can do accelerated depreciation. I didn't know that. And look at this. I can do this other tax strategy. Did you know that?" And the CPA said, "Of course." He said, "Well, you've been doing my taxes for 10 years or whatever. Why haven't you told me this?" He said, "Well, you never asked. I'm a CPA. I prepare tax returns. I'm not a strategist." And so he fired this CPA and he went out and got a tax strategist, somebody who really understood real estate. So that's my first advice to anybody investing in any kind of real estate is make sure your CPA is actually also a tax strategist or become one yourself. There's so many tax strategies. I identified about 10 of them in my book. Another one is using an IRA. Of course, we all know we can use a Roth or a SEP IRA or a self-directed 401k in some
Mm-hmm.
cases to invest in real estate. And that can be really, really lucrative. The other one, another one I should say, is a 1031 exchange. Everybody, I think almost everybody knows this. You may recall in December of 2017, after Trump's first year in office, that the Congress passed a law that changed the 1031 exchange. You couldn't do airplanes and cars and bulldozers and art and all this stuff anymore, but they preserved it, not surprisingly, for real estate investors. And that is a great strategy. The problem is it doesn't work too well with syndications.
Mm-hmm.
Some syndicators are really bent on 1031 exchanges, and they'll take the entire syndication. By the way, a syndication might have, again, one general partner or a group of general
Mm-hmm.
partners, and then maybe let's just make it simple and say 100 passive investors. We'll call those LPs,
Mm-hmm.
limited partners. Well, those limited partners all have to go together and the GP as well to 1031. So they might build a lot of forced appreciation into one mobile home park like yours, increase the value significantly, and then 1031 into another one. And that means all the investors go with them. It's not super common, to be honest. It's certainly possible. And for those who are using a 1031 exchange, either that way, passively, in a passive syndication, or actively, there's if you continue to do that, like some of my investors do, they plan to continue to 1031 over and over again until they pass away. And then there's a reset basis at their death. A lot of people know this. And that means if they sell the properties a month before they die, all that capital gains will have to be paid. And there's probably going to be a lot if you've done several 1031s. However, if you pass away owning those properties, your heirs will never have to pay that capital gains with some limitations that we don't have time for. So that's really a great strategy. There's also something called a Delaware statutory trust. You can look into it yourself. If you come out of a 1031 and you're tired, sick and tired of managing these properties actively, and you want to just be passive, you can 1031 exchange into a Delaware statutory trust. And there's other vehicles like that as well that we won't get into. But there's ways to kick that can down the road on capital gains. Now, another tax strategy is accelerated depreciation. We mentioned that briefly. Congress in December of 2017 passed a law that allowed something like the first 15 or 18 years of accelerated depreciation all to be pushed into year one in some cases. What's accelerated depreciation? Well, to be brief here, a residential property like, let's say, a four-unit apartment building, or a home, or other properties, even larger apartments in some cases have a 27 and a half year life where they can depreciate a lot of the stuff there, a lot of the value of it, not including the land. Commercial real estate's often more like 39 years. Well, accelerated depreciation allows us to divvy up the property or segregate it and say, hey, the roof's only got a 15-year life. So we're going to actually, we're going to depreciate the roof over 15 years. Some of this, the electrical outlets and the baseboards and some of the plumbing might only have a 5-year life. Some of the computer stuff might have a 5-year life. So that accelerates the depreciation, which means you can claim large paper losses in early years. And sometimes it will shield most or all or more than all of the income that's thrown off by that property, which means investors effectively won't have to pay tax for potentially 3, 4, 5, 6 years or more. That's just an example. And then someday when that property is sold, that there'll be a catch up. It's called depreciation recapture. And I'm not a tax expert, but the tax experts and strategists tell me, Robert, that the the tax bill at that time of the sale is much less than if you would have paid on income tax along the way. For example, if you have a 35% tax bracket, you might only be paying 20 or 25%, closer to capital gains, as you repay that recapture. There's also tax abated real estate.
Mm-hmm.
You can buy apartment buildings with tax abatements where there's
Yep.
a 99-year exemption on property tax. It dramatically increases the
Oh yeah.
value because our value formula says, hey, the largest bill in this expense for this 100-unit apartment building in Dallas, is the taxes. And if that tax is wiped out by the structure, now the value of the apartment building goes up dramatically. And so that's
Huge.
another thing. The last thing I'll say is become a qualified real estate professional. Now, if you
Oh,
are doing
yep.
real estate full time, effectively, and there's a lot of rules we won't get into unless you want to, or if you can get a spouse to be a qualified real
Yeah,
estate.
that's what I've seen a lot of people do is get a spouse to do it. If they're working full time in their career, maybe the spouse is at home or part time, they can become that licensed qualified real estate pro.
Right. And by doing that, it allows you to take a lot of these paper losses and actually offset your W-2 or
Mhm.
1099 income, which is a very, very powerful strategy that a lot of people use to save millions in taxes. And by reallocating that money you would have paid Uncle Sam into investing more, the compound effect over decades is astronomical.
Love it. Everything you hit on are like major, just forefront tax advantages, tax strategies in real estate. But like you said, it's all about who you're working with and your team because we can sit here till we're blue in the face and talk about it, but you need to implement it. And that's going to take a tax strategist. I'm not one. You're not one. Like, we're not licensed for that. But you need to find someone that is one and have them help you set up a plan. Okay. So, with that said, let's talk about differences between real estate syndication versus like real estate investment trusts or REITs. A lot of people have heard of REITs as a passive way to invest.
Right.
And I mean, we touched on direct investment versus syndication and kind of the passive role that you can take. But other than just being passive and handing it off to a sponsor, like what are the main differences and advantages of syndication versus REITs and direct real estate?
All right, so let's talk about REITs. So most REITs that people are familiar with are public REITs. They're publicly traded. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that the value of the cash flow stream, remember, true wealth is having assets that throw off predictable cash flow. Well, the value of the income stream is not necessarily tied directly to your return on investment. Why? Because it's publicly traded, which means that your value or your wealth or your cash flow might be tied more to the mood on Wall Street or to a war in the Middle East or to a random CEO tweet or to a CEO scandal. Those things might dramatically affect your wealth more than the actual income from the
But what
property.
you're talking about is the stock market volatility. Am
I
I
am.
hearing that right?
Yes.
So REITs are tied to the stock market in most cases. Most REITs are public. So if we see a downturn in the stock market, even if your real estate investment trust is doing okay, it can be impacted, much like when there's a sell off on Wall Street and we see stocks that should be doing well are not. It's the
Yeah.
same thing. So, gosh, if that's not one reason to look at more privatized type investments that aren't based on the stock market, I mean, to me, that's the biggest one. But a lot of people have their wealth in stocks and they're trying to look at real estate as a way to diversify. So if you're
Right.
using public REITs, you're not really getting the diversification that you want because again, it's tied to the stock market. Now, something I've done is I have some private REITs that are not listed on the stock market, and those have done quite well. I've
Yeah.
done some cannabis REITs that are phenomenally performing right now, and those are private. I've done some other ones too. So I think that that definitely resonates on this end, and I think a lot of our listeners too.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you also wanted to talk about owning directly versus
Yes.
syndication. So, again, I mentioned the book, The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. Um, Focus is so important. As I've gotten older, I've realized that most of the major mistakes I've made in my life, and you said some really nice things about me at the top of the podcast, but those things are not nice to me. It was nice that you said it. But the truth is, if I look over my 35-year career, the biggest mistakes I made were lack of focus. It were chasing too many rabbits. It was chasing shiny objects. And so owning real estate on the side is possible and it's certainly doable. But I tell you, it's hard to scale. I
It
talked to
is.
a dentist once who started our call. He was calling about investing in our fund, and he said, "Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. I'm on a track to own 20 high-end rental homes in Seattle, and my wife is an orthodontist, and I'm a dental surgeon or periodontist, I think." And he said, "Yeah, except," and then he sighed deeply, and he said, "Except I'm tired." He said, "I'm calling painters between dental appointments, and I'm screening tenants in the evening." And then he paused for a long moment. He said, "And I'm only on house number two." And he just said, he just realized it wasn't scalable. It was going to be impossible for him to get 20 houses in his portfolio without pulling his hair out. And so, basically, syndications allow you to really focus on what you're good at, and that what you're good at might be, it might be pickleball if you're retired. It might be, serving your local nonprofit or church. It may be all kinds of things, or it may be making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year as a dentist or an IT professional. Honestly, spreading your focus out much broader than that is it's going to either affect your sleep, which is huge. It's going to affect your family. It's going to affect it's going to affect your wealth. It's just going to take a toll. And I really think people just are better off doing one thing really well. I know a lady who has a charmed life. She has 104 syndications. She's in Austin, and honestly, they're not all going well, but overall they really are.
Mhm.
And she has her full-time income plus from that.
That's what it's about. And I was kind of forced to do that because I had just moved up to Connecticut at the time and I wanted to invest in real estate, but I wanted to invest in other areas. I wanted to invest in Florida and California and like some of these better markets. At that time, Connecticut was one of the worst markets in the country. Wow, have the tables turned. But
Yeah.
back then it was like I was looking for that geographic diversification and I owned one rental property in North Carolina and I couldn't leave. Like I was tied to my desk and chair basically trying to build a business from the ground up a couple years into the industry. So I had to use syndicate. Like that was my only way. It was either that or have the money sitting in a savings account at that time that wasn't paying near what they are now. So I really it resonated with me and I was forced to do it, and it turned out to be one of the best things that I ever did because I got involved in more and more syndication, got excited about it, and now I'm sharing with everyone how great that this mechanism is, that a lot of the younger and newer investors, they just aren't aware of it because syndications have been around since the what 60s, 70s and 80s. They were really popular, but only now have they been brought online. So I would say to anyone that's looking for the passive income, syndication's the way to get it. I personally did direct real estate investment and I had to hire a property manager. Okay. I hire a property manager. They take 10% of my gross rent and that's their fee. But you know what? I haven't been to that property in 6 years. They just deposit the money in my account. It's absolutely worth the 10% management fee. But again, you can only scale that so much. I do still have to answer emails once in a while from them and approve things. So, like, it's not 100% passive, but I'd
Right.
say it's 90%. Whereas
Good.
the real estate syndication, 100% passive. And at some point, as an investor, like, you can't get to 6 figures a year in passive income with direct real estate investment. You really can't, not without a team behind you.
Right.
Because right now, even a few years ago, you're lucky to make after debt service 300, 500 a month. Maybe
Yeah.
if you're lucky, 700 a month per unit. So you have to have a lot of units and scale dramatically to get to that. With real estate crowdfunding, with syndication, as long as you have the capital, there's opportunity and you can easily scale. Like when I say easily, within 1 year, you can scale a real estate syndication portfolio to multiple 6 figures,
Right.
even sometimes 6 figures a month, right? Depending on the amount of capital that you have available to you.
Right.
So that's a big thing. Now, what I want to ask you about now is common mistakes for first time syndicators or first time investors in syndication, right? Because a lot of people are listening saying, hey, this sounds great, but it sounds too good to be true. Like, what's the catch? What mistakes do you see people make when they're doing their first investment in a syndication, and how can they avoid that?
Hands down, the biggest mistake is lack of due diligence. Everything looks good. Everything looks like it's going to work at first glance. Lack of due diligence is the biggest mistake by far. People just jump in. They might hear something on Monday and they wire money on Thursday, and there's nothing, that could work, but we want more than could. And the problem with private real estate like this is, unlike the REIT that's extremely publicly regulated, and
Mm-hmm.
they've got their problems too, private real estate, they can make a lot of bold claims, and it may or may not be true, or they may or may not have the team to carry it out, or they may or may not have an error in cell C36 of their spreadsheet that you don't find. So, or they may be using risky floating rate debt. And we found out in 2022 what that did with 11 rate hikes. Those people are in huge trouble now.
Mm-hmm.
So you really need to do tremendous due diligence. One way to do that is to join like a passive syndicator club. And if you've got a pencil, you can write this down. One is called the Private Investor Club. Ian Ippolito started that in 2013. And basically, he was a high net worth IT guy who realized there was no way to rate and review syndications. And so he started the Passive Investor Club, which is part of the real estate crowdfunding review. There are other ones. Bigger Pockets, which everybody knows about, also has passive pockets, and that's a place where people gather to learn more. Some people just come to a fund who does the due diligence for them. And that's why a whole lot of people come to us. But due diligence is the biggest thing. We have a 27-step due diligence process. Takes us months to go through, costs us thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to make one investment because we do an NOI, a net
Mm-hmm.
operating income audit, and all kinds of other things that are seriously deep dives.
I would agree. And I think something that it took me several years to get into was realizing that even doing the research and due diligence that you're talking about as a personal or individual investor, it can still take time. It can still be daunting. It's a lot of data to work through. Now, if you're using a portal like a real estate in a syndication portal, for example, Realty Mogul, Fundrise, that sort of thing, right? Previously there was one called Realty Shares. So they give you everything on a silver platter. They give you the appraisal, they give you the sponsor track record, they give you everything. You just have to sit there, and it might take an hour or a couple hours, but you need to go through the data. So I would agree on that mistake, and it's a mistake I actually almost made because I'll tell a quick story. Probably the fifth or sixth syndication deal I was going to invest in was a place called the Hard Rock Hotel in Palm Springs, California. Okay, this is back in, I think, around 2012, 13, somewhere in there. I always wanted to invest in a hotel like Hard Rock. What a brand, right? Like, if I could find a hotel to invest in, that sounds awesome. And Palm Springs, vacation destination. Like, I had actually been in Palm Springs like a year earlier for my cousin's wedding, and I loved it. I thought it was a great area to vacation. And I'm just like, cool. Everything lined up. I didn't really do much due diligence. I'm just like, oh my God, I can get involved in this. And to make matters even cooler, the sponsor had it set up where if you're an investor in the syndication, you actually get a discount on the hotel rooms too. It was like 25 or 50% off. So that was cool. So like I just signed everything and sent my money because I was so freaking excited about being a hotel investor with like my 10 grand.
Yeah.
And it was a very expensive hotel, like I think into the hundreds of millions. But anyways, long story short, I invested and I was excited, and then I sent my cousin a text message. I said, hey Jay, my cousin, I just said, hey, I just invested in the Hard Rock Hotel Palm Springs. It looks amazing. I know he lives in LA, he's down there. I'm like, do you know what's the deal? Like, I'm so excited about this. And oh my gosh, I got the worst review I've ever heard of a hotel. Him and his wife and their new baby had just been there like a few weeks earlier, and it was like the worst experience of their life as hotel guests at that hotel.
Wow.
Then I went on online and did some research, just some reviews, and I read horrible reviews about the hotel as well. And while part of the syndication and the sponsor and what they were doing was, some new management and repositioning some things, I couldn't do that. Was it. Like, I did my due diligence. I didn't feel right to have a family member that had nothing but bad things to say about that. My money wasn't going to the right place. So I emailed the real estate crowdfunding portal and I told them, hey, it's only been a few days. Like, the deal hasn't closed. Please refund me. I don't want to move forward. I
Good.
don't know how it ended up performing in the end. It might have done great, but I say that because due diligence is important
Yeah.
and we get emotional with this stuff. Sometimes it's so exciting to be a part of something big
Right.
that we forget to read the small print or the fine print and
Yeah.
really do your due diligence. So take your time. If it's really rushed, like, that's a red flag. Take at least a couple days to really sleep on it, read the information through, and do your due diligence, like you said. So as we wrap up here, we only have a few minutes left, but I want to ask you about the current climate and what you see for syndication in 2025 and beyond, because we've seen a real change in commercial real estate, which is where a majority of syndications operate in that space. And, no one knows what's to come, right? We don't know. Are rates going to continue going down, meaning like the federal funds rate's going to keep getting cut? Are they going to pause? Are they going to go back and raise it more, which could be devastating? So what do you see as opportunities that lie like in the next 12 to 18 months in syndications in commercial real estate?
Yeah, so the last year or two with, these increased interest rates, a lot of people haven't got their cash out of other deals. That has basically meant that they are not investing in a new deal. And so there's been a big slowdown in capital raising, big slowdown in deal flow. I think that's going to loosen up. We predicted it would. You know, Interestingly enough, seven of the last eight times, I think, Robert, that the Fed cut from the first interest rate cut, which I believe was in August or September, seven out of the last eight times, I think, 8 months average, 8 or 9 months average later, there was a recession. And so some people think there's going to be a recession. Some people think the optimism over the new administration and new Congress is going to offset that. Who knows? It's hard to say. All I can say is if you're going to invest in syndications, number one, due diligence. Number two, diversify. If you can diversify, and I know you've done this, Robert, across different asset types, and we like recession resistant asset types like mobile home parks, self-storage, apartments, light industrial. Also across geographies. We've invested in Connecticut, for example, Wisconsin, Colorado, Utah. We like investing geographically, also among sponsors. No matter how good a sponsor is, things can go south if, an employee quits or dies or their founder, messes up. It's really good to diversify across places in the capital stack even. You might want to get some preferred equity, maybe some debt, and some common equity. Those are different things to do, and then also diversify across strategies. You might want to have some value add deals, some ground up construction, and some just cash flowing investments. So those are some of the things I recommend for people who are getting into this in 2025 and
So
beyond.
really, you don't have a crystal ball. You don't know what's going on either. And if you're diversified in all areas, then you can weather the storm. And I
Right.
found that myself because I've been invested in commercial real estate through this downturn. And some of my syndications have paused distributions, right? I mean, that's part of the game. It happens. But I'm so diversified in so many different geographies. And like, while one syndication may not be doing that well, I had another ground up medical building that just was sold and gave a huge return, like ridiculously huge. So you really have to have that diversification. If you're going to do syndication, one of the main reasons to do it versus other ways of investing is for the diversification. So don't just invest in one building or one project, get the diversification. And that's actually part of what Paul can help with. And that's really what I want to lead out here with as we wrap up. Talk about, to those that are interested in getting started with real syndication or continuing to build out their portfolio, if they want to work with you, talk a little about your firm, what you guys do in the syndication space, and how people can get started.
Yeah, so we realized, we were a multifamily syndicator back about 10 years ago, and we realized, we really need to diversify across asset types, and self-storage mobile home parks were the next two. And we realized, wait a minute, we can't be an expert. We want to be in the top, the 80-20 rule. We want to be in the top 20% of the syndicators to get better protection for our investors, better cash flow, better results. We're never going to be able to be in the top 20% in several different asset types in several different markets and several different strategies. And so we pulled back a level and said, okay, we're going to be sort of a fund that goes out and hand picks operators and geographies and deals and structures. And so that's what we've done at Wellings Capital. We've done 6 funds. We just closed our 6th one, and we're getting ready to launch 2 new funds, a growth fund and an income fund. And though there are no guarantees, our goals are, first of all, protection of principal, second, cash flow, and third, appreciation with tax benefits along the way, of course. So that's our goals. People can reach out to us if they want to learn more about us.
And how do they get in contact with you, or what's your website or contact?
Yeah, they can go to our website, which is wellingscapital.com. That's WELLINGS capital, wellingscapital.com. And if they want some free resources on investing in syndications, I've got a course there. They can get that they can get a course on self-storage, mobile home park investing, other types of investing at wellingscapital.com/resources.
Paul, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us and your experience. I mean, these insights that you're giving, people don't hear this anywhere else. Like, this is literally insider real estate information. And I know our listeners are going to get a ton of advice here from our discussion today. For those who want to learn more or work with Paul, he gave his contact info. Be sure to check out his books, Storing Up Profits and The Perfect Investment, right? So definitely check those out and reach out to him regarding Wellings Capital as well. And you can see him on Bigger Pockets. If you found value, please go ahead and leave a 5-star review for this podcast. We really appreciate that. And that's how we get the word out to everyone that we're providing value here for the community out there of first-time investors and real estate moguls and upcoming moguls alike. So please subscribe to the podcast, leave us that rating, and until next time, here's to making 2025 your best year in real estate. Thanks again, Paul, and we'll see everyone soon.